They were 27 teenagers full of life, energy, and the kind of hope only youth can afford. This was their final adventure before stepping into adulthood, a trip they had planned for months to celebrate the end of high school and the beginning of something new, but something went terribly wrong. The group vanished without a trace. There were no phone calls, no bodies, not even wreckage, just silence. For 22 years, the story of the class of '99 was passed down, like a dark legend shared in whispers around campfires, dismissed by some is nothing more than a cautionary tale, too unbelievable to be true. But everything changed on June 3, 2021, deep in Oregon's Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, when a lone hiker stumbled upon something strange and terrifying, something no one was prepared for. It started as a regular hike. The man, a seasoned outdoorsman, wandered off his usual trail, hoping to explore new ground. That's when he saw it, a flash of faded yellow through the trees. At first, he thought it might be an old ranger outpost or perhaps forgotten equipment left behind by forest workers. But as he drew closer, the shape revealed itself a rusted, decaying school bus, swallowed by vines and moss, half consumed by nature itself. The paint was barely visible, the number on the side smudged and weather-worn. Stepping inside, he found a scene that defied time. Backpacks still clung to seats, covered in dust. Faded Polaroids were strewn across the floor. A warped cassette player sat in the aisle, ruined by years of moisture. Pages of a high school yearbook were stuck together by mold, and in the very back seat of the bus, beneath a pile of decaying clothes, lay something unmistakable, a human jawbone. The discovery triggered an immediate response. Authorities rushed to the scene, and soon, the horrifying truth began to surface. This wasn't just an abandoned vehicle. It was a long-lost piece of one of Oregon's most chilling mysteries, the disappearance of Forest Grove High School's senior class during their 1999 graduation trip. The connection was undeniable. Inside the bus were personal items belonging to nearly every student who vanished that year. Some were untouched, others were arranged in strange, deliberate patterns as if trying to communicate something. But as investigators dug deeper, the case became more confusing. There was no record of the bus ever being rented, no sign of it entering the forest, no trail cameras had picked up movement. No nearby roads could explain how it even got there. The conclusion was terrifying. This wasn't an accident. It was a secret buried by time, hidden for over 2 decades, and never meant to be uncovered. To understand how such a tragedy could happen, we have to go back to May 1999. Forest Grove High School was alive with the buzz of excitement. Seniors roamed the halls with a mix of pride and anxiety, knowing graduation was just around the corner. Locker doors slammed, laughter echoed through corridors, and teachers wore the tired smiles of those counting down the days. Among the graduates were 26 close friends, not because they were the most popular or the most gifted, but because they had grown up together. Years of shared classes, heartbreaks, jokes, sports games, and parties had made them nearly inseparable. Lacey Monroe, the class valedictorian and daughter of the town mayor, walked the halls with quiet confidence. She was every parent's dream, president of the student council, straight A student, future Ivy Leaguer. But behind her perfect image lay the crushing weight of expectations. Friends who knew her best had seen the cracks: late-night panic attacks, study sessions that turned into breakdowns, and anxiety masked by a polished smile. Jared Fields, meanwhile, was the class clown, always with a camera in hand. He had been filming a mockumentary about their last week of school, calling it his Blair Witch, but funnier, loud, hilarious, and full of ideas. Jared's humor disguised a deeper brilliance most people overlooked. Tyrese Hall was the school's star athlete, a towering presence already signed to Oregon State on a football scholarship. Everyone had high hopes for him, his coaches, classmates, and especially his single mother. But with every praise came a shadow of doubt. Tyrese feared that high school might be the peak of his life, that the future held only disappointment. And then there was Emily Trana, quiet, observant artist who barely spoke, yet seemed to notice everything. Her sketchbook, filled with haunting forest landscapes and portraits of classmates, never left her side. She claimed her visions came in dreams, though not officially part of the group. She was trusted by all something about her presence felt. Grounding. When the final bell rang on that fateful Friday, the school erupted into celebration. Permission slips were handed in, songs blasted from car stereos, and all conversations turned to the upcoming trip. The destination was a secluded campground, deep within the wilderness of Oregon's Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. It was perfect, beautiful, remote, far from adults and rules. The group boarded a yellow school bus driven by Harold Griggs, a substitute driver called in at the last minute. Spirits were high, students waved goodbye to peace signs at campquarters, and captured grainy footage full of laughter and excitement. That was the last time anyone saw them. That evening, at exactly 6:41 p.m., Rachel McClure's mother received a voicemail from her daughter. In the background, muffled laughter, then a voice shouted, "Turn that off." What followed was unsettling. No goodbye, no click, just static. When the bus failed to arrive at the campground, it was assumed they were delayed. Fog had rolled in. The forest roads were narrow, some barely paved, with dangerous cliffs on either side. Calls went unanswered. By Sunday morning, concern turned into horror. Search and rescue teams combed the forest. Helicopters scanned treetops, dogs followed trails that led nowhere. There were no broken branches, no cell phone signals, no tire tracks. It was as if the entire bus had vanished into thin air. The only evidence that remained was that voicemail and the haunting mystery of what had happened in those woods. For over 2 decades, the case remained cold, until a rusted bus in the forest reopened wounds that never healed. What happened to the class of '99? Who or what was responsible? And why did it take 22 years for the truth to start surfacing? Maybe the forest knows. Maybe it never wanted them to leave. No yellow school bus ever arrived. No calls were made. No students returned home. It was as if the vehicle and every soul inside it had been erased from existence. As the hours passed and fear turned into dread, search teams intensified their efforts. By the 3rd day, they widened the perimeter. Helicopters swept over treetops. Volunteers combed through thick forest trails. Still nothing, not even a tire mark or broken twig. 1 week later, a glimmer of hope surfaced, or so it seemed. A local fisherman, casting his line near a remote river bend 15 miles from the main road, noticed something lodged in the mud. It was a disposable camera, its plastic casing cracked, waterlogged from time and the elements. Investigators carefully examined it, but what they found deepened the mystery. The camera was empty. Its film had been deliberately removed. 10 days after that, another unsettling development emerged. Trevor Callahan's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan, received an envelope in the mail. It bore no return address, no stamp, no indication of where it had come from. Inside was a single scrap of paper written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Were just 5 words: "We made it. Please stop looking." At first, the Callahans were overwhelmed with emotion. Was this proof that their son was alive, that the students had survived? But forensic handwriting analysts quickly cast doubt. The letter's pen pressure was inconsistent, the strokes irregular. While it resembled Trevor's writing, experts concluded it was likely forged, possibly traced. The note, however, reignited long-standing rumors. Some believed the teens had staged their disappearance, orchestrating a great escape. Others whispered of cults operating in the deep woods. There were even murmurs of ritualistic practices. Some clung to the belief that the students were still alive, hiding, watching from the shadows. But hope could not erase the facts. No trace of the bus, no sign of the driver, and no bodies had ever been found. No witnesses ever came forward. And after 2 months of frantic searching, the case was quietly closed, marked an unresolved missing persons incident, filed away under dust and sorrow. But for the families, the case was never closed. Grief lingered like smoke, clinging to every object, every memory. Some parents returned to the forest each year, retracing their children's last known payouts. Others kept their children's faces alive on bulletin boards and websites, never letting them be forgotten. One father, Robert Vasquez, whose son Miguel was among the missing, became obsessed with solving the mystery. He kept a meticulous journal, filling its pages with every lead, every theory, every sleepless night. "I don't think they drove off the road," he once wrote. "I don't think it was an accident. I think something took them. Something that didn't want them found." He never elaborated, and no one could prove him wrong. 21 years passed. Forest Grove High School carried on. New students walked its halls. New memories were made. But the shadow of the class of 1999 never left. Near the school entrance, a bronze plaque was mounted, etched with the names of the 27 missing students, under the solemn words, "Gone, but never forgotten." Every June, the school held a small memorial. Teachers lit 27 candles. Some teachers had retired early and able to bear the burden of unanswered questions. Others stayed, haunted by the faces of students frozen in time. Across town, time had moved differently for the parents. Bedrooms remained untouched, posters faded. Trophies and half-filled journals collected dust. Beds stayed made, as if their owners might walk through the door at any moment. Some parents clung to hope. Like oxygen, others sank into silent grief, the kind that doesn't scream, but settles deep and still. Mr. Delaney, father of Matthew, the class valedictorian, spent hours each week at the public library, rereading his son's final essay again and again. Mrs. Santos watered the same backyard garden her daughter Nina planted weeks before the trip, though she never allowed a single petal to be disturbed. But no one held on harder than Irene Monroe, mother of Lacey. While others slowly accepted the finality of loss, Irene refused to surrender. She never signed a death declaration. She refused to hold a funeral. Lacey's room remained exactly as she left it. Her toothbrush sat in its holder. Her voicemail greeting stayed active. Her bed was made fresh every morning. "She's not gone," Irene would say. "I don't know where she is, but she's out there. I feel it." Some neighbors called it denial. Her family called it uncheckable love. Then, on June 3, 2021, almost exactly 22 years to the day, a man named Travis Milner, an off-duty firefighter from Medford, Oregon, took a day hike through the lesser-known trails of the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. He wasn't looking for anything, just solitude. A few hours into his hike, hacking through dense brush and long-forgotten pathways, Travis saw something unnatural. A flash of faded yellow, nearly camouflaged by nature. As he cleared away layers of undergrowth, the shape became clearer. Metal, windows, rubber. It was a school bus, rusted, corroded, and swallowed by time. The frame was warped. Vines had split through its roof. Tree roots had begun to merge with the tires. Faintly visible on the side was a number, Bus 57. The door had fused shut, swollen from decades of rain and decay. Travis forced it open. A gust of air burst out, stale, pungent, dead. Inside was a tomb. Ivy hung from broken windows. Seats were torn apart, mold covered every surface. On the floor lay scattered school bags, rotting Letterman jackets, and crumbling graduation caps. At the back of the bus, half covered by debris and a collapsed luggage rack, hung a jacket embroidered with the Forest Grove High School crest. As Travis looked closer, horror gripped him. Bones, not one set, but many. Some were fully skeletonized, others partially decayed. He counted them 17. 17 human remains. His 911 call sparked a frenzy. Within hours, the forest was swarming with law enforcement, forensic experts, and anthropologists. The world watched as a decades-old mystery reignited. Families were thrust back into grief and confusion. The bus became a crime scene frozen in time. Investigators began cataloging every item most destroyed by time and weather, but beneath the driver's seat, buried inside a moldy, cracked backpack, they discovered something chilling: a manila folder, still intact despite water damage. Inside were sketches, dozens of them drawn in charcoal and pencil, each one signed in the bottom corner with a single name: Emily T. Emily Thompson. one of the missing students. One of the few whose remains were not found on the bus. The drawings were nightmarish. One showed a circle of figures in a forest clearing, surrounding a fire. Another depicted faces peering out from trees watching, silent. Others were less obvious but equally disturbing symbols, shadows, a black sun. Investigators weren't sure what to make of them. Were they clues, warnings, or visions? And then came the final question. If Emily's drawings were here, where was Emily, the crude? Sketches found in the manila folder grew darker with each page, as if the artist had descended deeper into a nightmare she couldn't escape. The first few drawings were disturbing blank, expressionless masks scrawled in charcoal, eyes like empty voids. But the next image was far more intense, almost violent. It showed branches hanging over a forest floor, thick with dripping blood. The red pulled into a circle, as if forming a ritual space. Behind the scene were etched symbols unfamiliar, jagged, and ominous. Linguists and symbologists were brought in, but none could match the markings to any known language, ancient or modern. Some of the sketches looked torn, as if ripped hastily from a journal. Then came the final image, perhaps the most haunting of them all. It was unmistakably the same school bus found in the Oregon woods, but this version was surrounded by tall, faceless figures, their elongated shadows stretching into the trees. In the front seat, behind the wheel, was a mask. Not a person wearing it, just the mask, staring forward. As investigators worked to identify the remains found on the bus, the weight of the case intensified. Through a mix of dental records and DNA analysis, they confirmed that 17 of the 28 who had vanished were accounted for. Among the deceased were students, all once full of life and hope, but 9 students were still missing. So were both chaperones, Mr. Carl Muse, the AP history teacher, and Miss Janine Crawford. With the discovery of the bus, all previous theories collapsed. This was no accident. The bus was located deep within the forest in a location so remote and overgrown that no vehicle of its size could have arrived there naturally. There were no roads, no tire tracks, and no signs of a crash. It was not driven there, it was placed. They're intentionally hidden. The question haunted every investigator. Why were only 17 bodies found? Where were the others? And why had Emily Thompson, a soft-spoken art student who rarely drew attention to herself, created such terrifying and prophetic images? Was she a witness, a victim, or something else entirely? As officers expanded their search around the crash site, progress was slow. The terrain was brutal, and the forest seemed to close in on them. No footprints, no disturbed soil, no more remains. Just silence and an eerie sense that they were being watched. The case was officially reopened, not as a simple recovery effort, but now as a major criminal investigation. Foul play was not only suspected, it was certain. And when Emily's drawings leaked to the press, theories erupted. People whispered about cults, others speculated about the supernatural. But one thing was becoming clear: something far more sinister had taken place in those woods. Within days, the story dominated every major news outlet. Outside the Bend police station, media vans lined the block. Reporters shouted questions. Camera crews camped overnight. The public was desperate for answers. What had really happened to the class of '99? Who or what was behind the masks? And why had nothing surfaced for 22 years until now? Then on the morning of June 10th, something unexpected happened. While the station stirred with routine, chatter, and the soft hum of overhead lights, the front door opened and a man stepped in. At first, no one paid much attention. He looked like a drifter, painfully thin, almost skeletal, his long, greasy hair matted to his face. A torn jacket hung loosely off his bony shoulders. His eyes, sunken and haunted, darted around the room like those of a cornered animal. His skin was pale, and dirt clung to his fingernails and clothes. He moved slowly, cautiously, as if each step was a decision. The conversation among the officers ceased. All eyes turned toward him. He approached the front desk, leaned in slightly, and whispered just loud enough to be heard, "I'm Jared Fields." Class of '99, silence blanketed the room. For several seconds, no one moved, no one breathed. Jared Fields was one of the students who had vanished on the trip, presumed dead, buried in the collective grief of a town that had mourned him. For over 2 decades, his name was engraved on the memorial plaque outside Forest Grove High School. Sergeant Emily Wells was the first to react. She stepped forward slowly, unsure whether she was looking at a ghost or a man who had somehow survived. "The impossible! Mr. Fields, may I see some identification?" she asked gently, but Jared didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the corners of the room, avoiding direct contact. His lips trembled. "I wasn't supposed to come back," he whispered. "They're still watching." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Sergeant Wells felt the chill in her spine. "Who's watching you, Jared?" she asked, keeping her tone calm, but Jared's response was barely a breath. They never left the woods. Suspicion hung heavy in the air like fog refusing to lift. Jared sat hunched, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if the very act of remembering required more strength than he possessed. He shook his head slowly, trying to rid himself of thoughts that clung to him like thorns. "I don't know," he muttered almost to himself. "I don't know. I was never supposed to come back." None of us were. His voice wasn't that of a man who had simply endured a tragedy. It was something else entirely. He sounded like someone who had been changed by survival, reshaped by horror. Like someone who had been forced to keep breathing through something unspeakably dark and unnatural. Sergeant Wells, who had been carefully pacing her questions with patience, now felt it slipping. They didn't need riddles, they needed the truth. The families deserve the truth. She stepped closer. "Mr. Fields," she said firmly, but not unkindly, "you need to tell us where you've been all these years. We need to know what happened to you, to your friends, to the others." Jared's eyes flicked toward the entrance of the room, his whole body tensing like prey sensing a predator nearby. "I can't," he whispered. "Not yet, not until I." He stopped, his throat convulsed as if the words had turned to poison mid-sentence. Before Wells could press further, the door opened and a forensic technician stepped in with a manila folder in hand. He passed it to her wordlessly. She flipped it open, scanned the contents and froze. "Jared Fields," she said slowly, eyes locked on the page. "Your fingerprints match. Your DNA, it's a confirmed match." For the first time since he entered the station, Jared truly looked up. His wide, haunted eyes met hers blank, almost pleading. There was no relief in that confirmation, only dread. "I told you," he whispered as though she'd just signed his death warrant. "I told you I wasn't supposed to come back. I shouldn't have come back." A stillness fell over the room. The officers watching expected closure. They'd hoped for answers to the 22-year-old mystery, the truth behind the missing students, the abandoned school bus, the skeletal remains. But instead, they were met with a man who seemed more like a living artifact, a piece of the puzzle whose presence deepened the shadows rather than illuminating them. Sergeant Wells steadied herself and asked, "What do you mean you weren't supposed to come back, Mr. Fields? Where have you been all this time? What happened to your classmates?" Jared recoiled slightly, as if her questions struck a nerve. His face twisted in fear and his breath caught in his throat. I can't. See, not yet," he stammered. "They're still out there, watching. They never stopped watching. Not for a second, and they won't stop until it's over." The room grew cold. The air turned dense with silence. Officers exchanged glances, unsure whether they were witnessing a mental breakdown or the tip of something far more sinister. Jared, the one person who could potentially explain what had happened in 1999, was unraveling before them, and then, as suddenly as he had arrived, Jared pushed back from the desk. "I can't stay here," he said, his voice now shaking. "They'll find me if I stay." He turned toward the exit. "Mr. Fields, wait." Sergeant Wells called out, rushing forward. "You have to stay, we need you." But he was already gone. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the room filled with silence, confusion, and the echo of footsteps fading into the world outside. Jared Fields had returned, but he hadn't brought closure. He had brought fear, the nightmare. It seemed wasn't over. It had just begun. Days passed, and Jared eventually agreed to return not to a jail cell, but to a secure interrogation room, this time under tighter protection. He sat across from investigators, his gaunt face pale under the fluorescent lights. His eyes were hollow but alert. The haunted look hadn't left, it had become part of him. For 2 hours, they went through timelines, names, memories, everything he could recall, and now he was ready. Ready to say what had haunted him for more. Then to decades, they were all dead, you know, he said quietly, his voice cracking with exhaustion. The ones who didn't listen. The ones who resisted, they just disappeared. No screams, no goodbyes, just gone. Jared paused, trembling. He rubbed his hands on his pants, trying to steady the weight of what he was about to say. The room fell silent again. This was the moment. The truth was finally coming to light. It started when the bus broke down. He continued. We were already deep in the woods, miles from any real road. The engine just gave out. We thought it was a glitch, something small. We tried restarting it, nothing. Then night came. We waited. We told ourselves someone would come. No one did. His voice dropped lower, slower. That's when they found us. He leaned forward, locking eyes with the lead investigator, his tone now cold and deliberate. They were robes, gray, filthy, like they'd been living underground or in the trees. Their faces, I don't know if they had any. Just hoods, masks. Jared swallowed hard. They didn't speak like us. They chanted, and the symbols, they were real. Just like the drawings Emily made. She saw them before we did. He paused, visibly shaking now. They didn't want all of us, just the ones who could hear them. They called themselves the Chosen. Jared began, his voice soft but resolute, heavy with the weight of old truths. They said they came from an off-grid sanctuary, a place of peace, untouched by the corruption of the outside world. A place to begin again. His eyes lowered, his shoulders sagging under the invisible burden of memory. They told us the world had already ended, that the society we knew was collapsing, and everything we loved was doomed to vanish. It sounded ridiculous, like a cult, like a fantasy. But we were stranded, no one had signal, the bus was dead, we were just kids stuck miles from anything familiar. We didn't have tools, we didn't have a plan. We didn't have a choice. The room was silent, the investigators watching intently as Jared's voice grew more urgent. So we followed them. What started as strange quickly turned surreal. Jared described a commune that felt, at first, like salvation. They gave us food, he said, told us to rest, promised we could stay as long as we needed. It seemed like everything was being taken care of. They smiled a lot, spoke softly. The whole place felt numb, like something in the air was slowing us down. He paused, exhaling shakily. But after a few days, the tone shifted. They started talking about reconditioning, about cleansing. They told us we needed to forget who we were, forget our names, our families, our past. We weren't allowed to mention where we came from or what had brought us there. Any word from the outside world was forbidden. He shook his head. It wasn't healing. It was erasure. The word cleansing lingered in the air, hanging like smoke. Jared's eyes darkened as he continued. The food didn't taste right. It was bland, metallic, dull. I think they were drugging us. Not enough to knock us out, just enough to blur things. To weaken our thoughts, his voice grew quieter. We started having dreams, horrible, vivid dreams. Screaming, shadows, forests that breathed. But they didn't feel like dreams, they felt real. Like we were being shown something. Like something was trying to enter our minds. He rubbed his hands over his face, struggling to stay composed. Then they started monitoring our sleep. We weren't allowed to rest on our own. We were told exactly when to sleep, when to wake. It didn't matter how tired we were, the schedule had to be followed. They always knew when we were awake. Then came the moment of collapse. Jared's voice cracked as he described the breaking point. Some of us couldn't take it. They tried to fight back. They said they wanted to leave, but they were afraid. We were all afraid. One night, a few of them tried to escape. They didn't get far. He swallowed hard. I heard them scream when the guards dragged them into the woods. And that was it. No one ever saw them again. No names, no burials, just gone. The officers in the room said nothing, but their expressions had changed. The weight of Jared's words had shifted the atmosphere entirely. Jared continued, his voice almost hollow. They told us they were the last light of the world, that only their sanctuary had survived. That everything else, the towns, the cities, even our families, had been wiped out. We were chosen, they said. We had been saved to help rebuild a better world. He let out a bitter laugh. But it wasn't salvation, it was control, and those who refused were sacrificed. He looked up, his eyes filled with something more than fear, a quiet despair. They were taken into the forest, offered up to what? I still don't know. He leaned back, drained. By 2006, I couldn't take it anymore. I ran. I waited until night, took what I could, and ran until my legs gave out. I didn't stop until I didn't recognize the trees. Somehow, I got out, but freedom didn't come with relief. I didn't tell anyone, he said. I stayed off-grid. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd forget me. That I could have a life, pretend it hadn't happened. I thought I was the only one left. Then came the tipping point. Jared's tone shifted when I saw the news, the bus, the bones. I knew. They hadn't forgotten and they wouldn't stop. That's why I came forward. I had to say it. Someone had to know the truth. The silence in the room was overwhelming. The investigators, though trained for grim stories, looked visibly shaken. Jared had just described something far more than a disappearance. He had unraveled a conspiracy, a cult, a ritualistic system of indoctrination and sacrifice that had consumed the lives of 27 teenagers and left the world believing they were simply lost. But they weren't lost, they had been claimed, and the forest, that dense, unforgiving wilderness that had hidden the bus and its secrets for decades, wasn't just a setting. It was part of it, a gate, a witness, or worse, a participant. In the days following Jared's confession, the community was torn apart. Some parents wept with relief. For the first time in 22 years, they had a story. An answer, a reason, however unthinkable, it gave shape to the void they had lived with, but others rejected it entirely. To them, Jared's story was madness, an insult. They couldn't reconcile the idea of their sons and daughters being indoctrinated, drugged, or sacrificed. They saw Jared as unstable, a traumatized survivor inventing darkness to make sense of chaos. As the media descended, the narrative fractured. Jared was labeled a hero, a fraud, a prophet, a madman. He faced death threats, fan letters, book deals, and lawsuits, sometimes all in the same week. But he never changed his story. He never backed down. The only thing he feared was silence. The police placed him in protective custody. Too many people had motives. Too many questions were left unanswered. Who ran the sanctuary? Were they still out there? And if so, had they stopped with the class of '99? Or were they still choosing? Months later, Jared published a memoir, The Ones Who Didn't Forget. It exploded. Conspiracy forums caught fire. Documentary crews lined up. Some readers were convinced. Others dismissed it as fiction, but no one could ignore it. Because the details, the ones only someone who had been there could know, were too specific, too consistent, and too disturbing. One line in the final chapter stood out. They said the world had ended. Maybe it had, but whatever's in that forest didn't end with it. It's still waiting for the next bus to break down. The town was never the same. The mystery of the class of '99 left a wound so deep it stitched itself into the roots of the forest and the hearts of those left behind. Though years had passed, the story remained alive, retold in whispers, revisited in nightmares, relived with every glance toward the woods. The forest still held its secrets. Somewhere beneath the moss-covered branches and tangled vines, answers lay waiting buried, dormant, and perhaps too dangerous to uncover. Jared Field's memoir, The Ones Who Didn't Forget, became both a beacon and a curse. Some hailed it as the truth the world had long needed. Others condemned it as the ravings of a man shattered by trauma. Either way, it was the final, aching chapter in a tale that had haunted the town for over 2 decades. The families of the missing were left with nothing but questions. Some still searched tirelessly, holding on to the fragile hope that their children were alive somewhere hidden, surviving, maybe even watching. Others, especially those who had believed Jared from the start, were left only with grief and the grim knowledge that their loved ones had never come home at all. That the forest hadn't just taken them, it had absorbed them. The truth, as Jared had revealed, was far darker than anyone had imagined. Even as time passed, the chaos did not subside. The frenzy following Jared's memoir refused to die down. Forest Grove remained a town split in two, between those who believed and those who couldn't. Jared's account, vivid and horrifying, painted a picture that many were unwilling or unable to accept. Some claimed he had exposed something long hidden. Others insisted he had made it all up to give his pain a purpose, but no one could ignore him. His words clung to the town like mist, impossible to shake. Jared, now a recluse, rarely emerged. He spoke only when necessary. An interview here, a meeting with investigators there, but otherwise lived in solitude, carrying the weight of his memories like a second skin. But on one overcast afternoon, with gray clouds stretched tight across the sky, Jared returned to Forest Grove High School. He walked the empty paths alone, his breath misting in the cold. The school, once filled with color and the laughter of teenagers, now stood quiet, a place of mourning, a monument to what had been lost. He made his way to the memorial stone monument engraved with the names of the 27 students who had vanished on that fateful trip. The polished granite glistened faintly under the gray light. It was smooth, cold, and heavy with sorrow. Jared knelt slowly before it, reaching into his coat. From the inside pocket, he pulled out a faded yearbook horn, mold-stained, its cover barely holding together. He opened it carefully, flipping through its yellowed pages. The faces stared back at him, smiling, innocent, unaware. Then, from within the folds of the book, he pulled a small piece of folded paper. And note, his handwriting, worn and shaky, but still legible. He tucked it gently beneath the back cover, hiding it in a place where only the truly curious would find it one day. The message read, "We tried to leave, only I made it." "I'm sorry." For several minutes, Jared simply sat there, staring at the names of the kids he'd grown up with, the friends he'd laughed with, the classmates who had never returned. He could still hear their voices, the rustle of sleeping bags, the music on the bus, the screams in the dark. The memories were sharp, unforgiving, the weight of it all pressed down on him like the trees themselves. And then, without a word, Jared stood, turned, and walked away, leaving behind only the yearbook and the final confession of a lone survivor. A message not for attention, not for forgiveness, but for truth, for anyone brave enough to believe it. To this day, some insist Jared made it all up. That the mind, when pushed to its breaking point, invents stories to explain the inexplicable. Others believe the truth was even worse than what he shared, that he told only what he dared. That the forest still holds more than bones and silence. But one thing is certain: what happened to the class of 1999 still lives in the trees, and the forest remembers.